All right, hey, welcome back for another one. So I have another mastering tutorial. There's another song going to be on my project, Pink Elephant Part 2. Release date is on the way, but let's go ahead and just get into it, man. Check out the song.
Looking back, tell me where you at. Looking back, looking in my past. Looking back, tell me where you at. If I wreck, sorry girl, my bad. If I wreck, told you girl, my bad. Don't be mad, I do.
All right, so a little piece, little taste, right? Let's go ahead and get into the actual mastering. Now, again, in my last one I mentioned that I'm gonna cover details that really aren't covered so much in mastered, because mastering is kind of a fine art, and it actually took me years to realize the exact reason why sometimes we have separate mastering engineers from mixing engineers, because they're kind of their own processes. Now, you can learn both, but you have to treat them like they're their own skill set that you have to learn. So first thing I did here on this song was I opened up this Ozone 9. Now, I don't usually do this as often now. However, at the time, this is the exact way that I would do these type of mixes. Now, again, this mix is like, very, very recent, but as you mix, you start to try new techniques, new things to get better and better and better, to get more of a consistent sound. So right here on this one, I use the Mastering Ozone Assistant here. Now, if you click Mastering Assistant, it's going to pop up this. So I have different options, right? The first module, you want a modern sound or vintage sound. Now, vintage is going to use certain vintage plugins that comes with Ozone 9. For his modern, it's just going to use non-vintage ones, more standard ones that you probably saw in like Ozone 8, Ozone 7. And then number 2 right here, manual reference. Now, I can't put a reference track in here to actually let it make it sound like at the reference track. Now, personally, I feel like I only would use reference if I'm doing a cover. So if I'm doing a cover, I'll let the the beat, let the AI kind of make it sound like the original beat, because beat usually recreations, and their mixing is, maybe may or may not be accurate. But the great thing is, even when you do this, you can change it. And then right here we have low, medium, high. Now this is in LUFS. Now -11 LUFS is going to be around like -8 to -10 dBFS. And so typically, you can take a song, reference it, look at the level, and you'll see that a lot of songs fall like -8, -6, sometimes around -10. So typically, when I use this, I always use the high option, so I can go and get it as loud as possible, and then I can back things off from there. But I want Ozone to make certain choices to give me a sort of standard, like an area to start at, to make a thick master while sounding transparent. And then lastly, just leave it on streaming. Nobody listens to CDs anymore, so just ignore that. So right there, so it'll listen to your song, and then it's gonna pop out a few different options. Now, I'm gonna leave it what it is because I don't want it to change it all, because I already did this, and usually I'll do it like twice. Now, usually when you do this, always play it. It's gonna actually play the song. Play the song at a part that actually has the low end in it, so all the instruments going on. That way, it can make a better assumption, because if you notice right here, it's working across the entire spectrum, so it needs to make very, very good decisions. If you play a part of the song that doesn't have a low end, or is missing certain percussion, or at least just doesn't have most instruments at the same time, it's going to make decisions based off what it's hearing. So it's a great starting point, but it's not the end all be all, so that's why I use it as a starting point. So first thing, right, it gave us an equalizer. Now these are all the decisions it made. It left it in stereo, right, pulled down some low end, boosted right here, 2153, boosted 3553, and it boosted high shelf, right? So before and after, at least on just this module right here, right?
Looking back, tell me where you at. Looking back, looking in my past.
All right, and then right here with this EQ on.
Looking back, tell me where you at. Looking back, looking in my past. Looking back, tell me where you at.
Right, small decisions, right? But it's a pretty, small decision, but it's a pretty good job. So that's that one right there. Now this one, dynamics, it always leaves this just like this. It never actually uses it. I don't even know why it even like pulls it up half the time, but it always does. Now you can turn on and mess with it yourself, but typically I like to just leave it. Now sometimes I will X this out, but I don't know if it's me or not, but I feel like the sound slightly changes when you take this dynamic section away. It gets a little less glued and thick, even though the plug is bypassed. I don't know why it is. Might just be me, but I use this, leave it here. And now our final one here is our dynamic EQ. Now in the last video, I used a F6 as a dynamic EQ, and I made those decisions myself. Well, Ozone will do the exact same thing, right? Exact same mindset. And so the difference about this plugin though is that it's gonna make all these decisions on its own, and it also has a scaling section. So on this scaling section, it'll choose attack and release automatically, right? Now you can use dynamic EQ and do exactly what you can do with like any other dynamic EQ, and just leave this section on, and all you have to really worry about is the frequency, the Q, and the threshold. And that's a good idea as well, but you know, sometimes based on the song you might want to do it yourself, but sometimes Ozone gets it exactly right. And so, you know, if it works, I leave it on. If not, I take it off. But it made all its own decisions here. Now this is all Ozone decisions, so I don't go over it too much. Now if we go to our next one, right, and I'll go ahead and bypass it on and off so you can hear.
Looking back, tell me where you at. Looking back, looking in my past. Looking back, tell me where you at. If I wreck, sorry girl, my bad.
All right, not the biggest thing ever, just like some slight cleaning up. Now after this, I made a decision here. I went into my master rebalance. I touched on the vocals, brought it up 0.5 dB just to get it slightly more in the pocket where I want the vocal to sit. Usually when I reference a song, I usually get the vocal loudness to at least be where I hear it in the reference. Doesn't have to be exactly that. Whatever makes sense for your song makes sense. But sometimes working with songs, even other people's music, you kind of want to, you know, make a small adjustment on the vocals. Now, not always, but a lot of times you may. Now, next, we have this imager. Now, I usually don't use imagers nowadays, but sometimes if it works, it works. Now, it's like the quick, dirty, lazy way to do it sometimes, but when it works, it does work well. So right here, I split this into two different bands, right? This is at 203, which is the low end, right? And then I have another one here for everything else.
Looking back, tell me.
Right, now this one decision I made myself. I didn't use the learn. Now learn is like it's gonna figure it out on its own, use the algorithm, but I like to do this part myself. So I pretty much get all the low end that I hear and then leave it there, and now here's the rest. Now in this instance, I only wanted to widen everything else. You don't typically want to widen your super lows. In this instance, it's below 203 because it gets kind of weird sounding, and so you want to leave it kind of more up the middle, and everything else can go wide. Now the great thing is that your low end, your bass instruments, and even your sub bass instruments, the frequencies actually tend to go up to like 5, 6, 7, 800, even 1,000 hertz. So it's okay to actually boost, you know, everything else, because it will actually make your bass instruments wider. Just the very low frequencies, you don't want to make that wide, right? Sometimes you get a little width to it, but not too much. Now I just made this decision by taste, by ear. The stereo wise, it adds a little extra width to it when you do it, but it makes it transparent. Again, I don't know how Ozone does it, but it's an exclusive thing to Ozone. So typically I'll turn this on, make these decisions, and then in this instance I took it away. The standard is 6, so in this instance I made it 4.5 right here. So, you know, right there, boom, I'll just leave it for there. Now I would choose mode 2 because I feel like it sounds a little better. Now before and after.
Looking back, tell me where you at. Looking back, looking in my past.
Got a wider sound.
Looking back, tell me where you at. If I wreck, sorry girl.
Now in most professional songs like you hear on Spotify, they're always gonna be pretty wide, and a lot of times before getting good at mastering, I always struggle with making my songs wide, and so that's kind of like the thing that separates, you know, more amateur masters from more professional ones, and so it's a big help. Now next, I did Ozone EQ. Now this was the EQ that I mentioned. I used mid and side because I want the most control across the EQ, you know, spectrum, across the EQ variety that I possibly can get. Now, if I just did this like in stereo, you're going to lose a lot of the control. Reason being is that, you know, in the sides, if you notice here, I rolled off all the way up to 60. Now, for me, I feel like that made perfect sense. You know, I actually really like to do that. All right, we're gonna cut right here and then hop back in. So right here in the side, I rolled all the way to 60. You know, I wanted to do that. I thought that made sense. Now, if I solo this right here, right, and we solo the side so we can only hear what we're rolling off, you don't really hear anything, right? And that's okay, but notice we still have a lot of energy here. So when I do roll this off, I'm creating headroom, because mastering is a game of headroom. So whenever my ceiling for my limiter is at -1, I only have so much space to make it loud. If I just crank, you know, my threshold in my limiter, like for example, if I just crank my threshold and my limiter up, 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 and up, right, and just pull it down, pull it down, pull it down, eventually all it's going to start doing is cutting out low end, and it's going to start kind of folding and reshaping and squashing your master. It's not very good. So you have to do as much as you can without getting too much crushing to make things loud. So a lot of times it's the headroom, right? Taking away some of the low end that you can't really hear so that you can actually boost other things and still have space, have room. And that's the technical part of mixing, is having space and room on a technical level with your dBs to actually get a louder apparent sound. So I could roll this higher and like it's still be fine. Listen. All right, go 155 over here. Hear something. I can even hear something here at 74. And at 60 was a place where I felt like, okay, I don't hear anything anymore, right? So that's where I chose it to be. Now, I usually don't want to take out things I can hear. Now, if you did a little bit, it's okay. But again, I just want to get a little bit of headroom for myself. So that's that frequency. Now, I made certain decisions here in the sides of boost. Now, remember, whenever you roll off in the side or even the mid, you want to solo the actual sides, and you want to solo the actual band that you're using. That way you can only hear that, so you don't make sure to underdo it or overdo it. However, though, anytime I make like EQ decisions, boosting or cutting, I will turn the side off. Here's the song regular.
Looking back, ay, tell me
Right.
where you at.
Have the song regular, and then from here I'll just solo the band, so I hear all the frequencies present. I don't care if it's mid or side. So in this example, I boosted right here 2.9, and it sounded like this. Right, pretty wide Q here, but it's a very soulful frequencies that I really wanted to boost, and I made that decision while listening to it. And then like here, I made some boost right here, 1175 to dB. Nice instrumentation sound, nice vocal sound, so I wanted to boost that. And so, these decisions are just really going, hey, I'm soloing, I'm listening and seeing what really sounds good, and then I boost it. Now on the sides, you can be a lot more liberal with it, right? You can be a lot more gratuitous. You can boost a lot more, right? 2 dB here, and then 2.9 dB here. The great thing is that I rolled off some, so I got some dB back. Now, if you want to check exactly how much, I recommend putting 2 meters that just show you like dBFS, right? Your level. I use like MV meter, which is a great one. So usually like I'll take like an MV meter and I'll put it like right here, right? I'll put it like right here, so we have it, and then I'll put it like at the end, right? So I'll like copy it and put it like at the end of everything. That way I can act before and after what I've done so far, and that will actually allow me to see how much dB I'm actually gaining or losing, especially when I'm really tight on my headroom. And so if you really want to see like how much you're gaining or losing, do it. Now sometimes, after you made all these decisions here, you may actually check your meters, and on your meters it's like, oh, it went up 0.5. Well, guess what? If I boosted 2.9 here, boosted 2 here, and then took some away from here, my apparent loudness is going to be so much louder than how much I boosted in terms of my technical headroom. So I might only go 0.5, but it sounds so much louder, and it's at the right frequency that sound good, and you don't really sound you lost anything because you cut something that you could hear in the first place. So before and after.
Looking back, ay, tell me where you at. Looking back, looking in my past. Looking back, tell me where you.
That's the whole thing, right? And then mentioning here the mid frequencies, I didn't really boost much here. I did like 0.2, right? In the mid, you have to be very careful though how much you boost, because what you boost in the mid is the biggest difference. And sometimes it'll make the middle, right, of your spectrum in stereo, your middle part, it'll make it pop out too much, and so the sides you won't really be able to hear as well. And a lot of times what's gonna make your song sound good is boosting so much more on the sides, because it's really quiet, and like that's the stuff you need to be bringing up. And then the stuff in the mid, you can boost here and there a little bit, but just a little bit, because you don't want to fold your mix and kind of mess up the whole thing. And so I only did 0.2 here, but right here I rolled off at 20. Now reason being is because if I solo this and like we want to hear what's only here, now the human ear can't hear below 20, so you can't hear anything in the first place, right? But if I start to roll it up, you may or may not be able to hear that. If you have studio monitor headphones, you can probably hear it, but I'm getting some of the low end. Still got some there, still feel it there, still feel it. So about 20 is where I don't have anymore. And so sometimes you just want to do it at 20 so that you can actually get whatever headroom is happening below 20, sometimes a little bit higher, right? Just a little small slope is still cutting a little bit here. So you get a little bit of headroom, but again, you get it where you can. Some songs you can get more or less, but at the end of the day, you're trying to make this master as loud as you can. Now, professional songs, you know, they do vary loudness sometimes, but again, for the songs you have, you want to make get as much as you possibly can from it. So next we have our exciter. Now, typically I use this across any master. Reason being is because whenever you use an exciter, you're adding saturation, aka like distortion, but it's called saturation because it's pleasant, right? If I say distortion, usually a bad thing. If I say saturation, it's typically a good thing. It's about something pleasing. It's the same exact thing, just it's relative to how it sounds to you. Now, when I do this, I get all these bands available. So you just click across here, get all the bands that it has. I click learn. I play a part of the song that has the bass. It'll choose frequencies, and I trust it. Like, I've never had a problem with trusting the algorithm for choosing the bands, so I let it do that. Then from here, you know, I usually come here and I choose what type of saturation I want. I have a lot of different options. Now, typically, for me personally, I only will ever use retro, tape, tube, or dual triode. But I found myself lately, I only use dual triode. Now, they all sound very, very different, but what I find is that I always tend to have this selected so you can just do all these at the same time. I'll double click mix, right, and then I'll turn it to 50, and so they're all halfway, right? So that way it's not fully blended in, right? So that's now it's doing parallel processing. Now parallel processing is powerful in mastering because I want to make a change, but I want to make it subtle and controlled. Again, I don't want to change too much in my master, like in terms of how the mix actually sounds, right? I want to enhance what I have. So I'll do it at 50, and then I'll go ahead and I'll solo like whatever band. So right, red and red, this is this one, and I'll start to boost this amount until I'm like, okay, that's too much, right? Like, I'll boost it and it sounds good. Then I boost it and it starts to sound bad. Now, if I just solo here, you can hear based off this decision I made. If I turn it off, oh, back and forth. So if you can hear that, it's a difference. It may be subtle, but mostly the difference is that that clap is hitting a little bit harder. I'm getting a little more snap in it. Sounds a little bit more musical, has a little bit more movement to it, right? A little more life. Same thing like this band, right? These are the amounts that I chose. Now notice, I will show you before and after.
Looking back, tell me where you at. Looking back, looking in my past. Looking back, tell me where you at. If I wreck.
So you notice the bigger difference when I turn it off. You just feel like it loses a lot. Now, in your frequencies, in your like super mid range, like your main mid range is like, in my opinion, it's like, you know, everything after like 200 all the way up to, you know, 5, 6, 7,000. Now sometimes, you know, it depends on how it sounds. If it sounds kind of high sizzly, like super high sizzly, it's going to be a high frequency. If it sounds a little bit more, I don't know, I call this like the unpleasant frequencies, because these frequencies in here just have this like unpleasant sound in a sense, right? So if you listen to that again,
looking back, tell me where you at.
Oh, let me turn that off. Right, it's a very like sounds, right? Not the most pleasant solo, but you do need those. So typically, those are I consider my high mids, and then my mids, right? Sometimes I say my mid mids, right? I consider my super mids will be like everything in this area,
Looking back, tell me where you at.
which is like the brunt of the music, and then our lows is everything that sounds like low end, sounds like bottom. So, you know, usually I'll have that, and now the biggest difference you'll notice in the mid-mids, right? And so I make decisions across the board, soloing, boosting until I can't no more, and then once I make my decisions, I'll pull down the mix until I'm like, okay, now it sounds almost normal again. I'll turn it off and on, bypass the band on and off to see like, did I underdo it, did I overdo it, and then I might even try to blend some more of this amount here a little more to get me a little more saturation, and I'll just kind of play with these until I feel like I'm in a good place. I'll go band by band individually, and then I'll bypass the whole thing, listen before and after. And so let's go ahead and listen before and after right here.
Looking back, tell me where you at. Looking back, looking in my past. Looking back, tell me where you at. If I wreck, sorry girl, my bad.
Now, very, very small differences is instance. If you notice, this mix is so low right here, these amounts are so low. Now in this song, it already was very like saturated. So in this instance, I couldn't add very much, but sometimes my amount is like on 7 or 8, and then my mix is like at 49, 45%. So it just depends on the song, right? Every song could typically get a little more in the mastering stage, but sometimes in this instance, there's already so much saturation present that I didn't really do too much, right? Now, small things, get it as much as you can because these things compound. Now, this is like the main master, right? This is mostly everything right here. Now it's my limiting stage. Now, I do 3 limiters, right? I use the Oxford limiter. Now, I stopped using this next one, right? The newfangled saturator. This is a soft clipper. Soft clippers, I feel like, in certain songs, it's very hard. Distorted type of songs like XXX Tentacion, Look at Me, right? That's a great song, very distorted. Or a lot of like Ski Mask, the Slump God, right? Ski Mask, Slump God, right? Whatever, right? A lot of Ski Mask, his songs are very distorted, right? And so because of that, those type of songs where that 808 or those instruments can have that type of sound, this is where like a soft clipper at least sounds good. Now you can get away with it on a lot of other songs too, but just kind of gets to taste, how you perceive it, right? Now I used to use this across everything, but I stopped now because I like a little bit more of a transparent sound, a softer sound. But again, this is a very aggressive sounding song because of percussion, so this made perfect sense for me to use here. Now, my Oxford, my soft clipper, and then the final thing is going to be right here, my limiter. Now, last video, if you watched it, you saw that I used a maximizer at the end, right? Again, I've changed what I do to get a more softer sound, but in this instance, I was going for something very, very hard. So I used the limiter as the last one. Now, I'd probably use a maximizer, but in this instance, this is very transparent. So, something not so transparent as a soft clipper, followed by a limiter that's very transparent. But these all act like brick wall limiters in a sense, right? They all kind of like hit things at 0 and just kind of like give me more sound while trying to transparently limit my sound. And that's how I usually approach this. So right here, right, Oxford limiter, if I have it off, we'll go off and on. I'll go ahead and turn this off. Now,
Looking back, tell me where you at. Looking back, looking in my past. Looking back, yeah.
Now you see the difference, right? A little bit of volume, only 1.65 in the gain. I don't think I'm getting reduction here.
Looking back, tell me
right? No visible reduction. There's a little bit of auditory reduction, right? But typically, I don't want to get too much visible reduction here. That way I know my reduction I'm getting is very minimal. So I know that I'm not making this limiter do too much of the work. Now, I left the attack what it started off as. This release, again, I use Howard Stern Music, their reverb and delay time calculator. I use that to set this time. Now, typically nowadays I'll use a much higher release because it's a more consistent, more full sound, but in this instance I chose to go with like something lower, 115. Now I like this limiter because I get to choose a release, I get to just do a little bit of input, and this is a very colored, right, a very almost saturated type of limiter, so I usually don't do too much of the input gain because even having it on makes a huge difference. And then the hand curve pushes the middle out, pushes the vocal out, pushes the everything in the kind of middle, it pushes it out a little more without really affecting my levels too much. So I get more options in terms of how I want to shape the sound with this limiter, but knowing that it's doing a little bit of limiting in itself, but it has extra features, so it's pretty nice. Now, right, I followed that up with a soft clipper. Now on the soft clipper, we'll go before and after.
Looking back, tell me where you at. Looking back, looking in my past. Looking back, tell me where you at. If I
right. So if you notice, this is a huge component in shaping the song. Now, usually whenever I master, I keep on my Oxford limiter, I have my soft clipper, right, and then I have my limiter. I will actually set all of these in the beginning, and then I'll add all my other processes with these at the very end while they're on. And then after these processes, I'll come back and readjust these because of the headroom that I've gained and the changes that I made. Now, I will master through these limiters because, if you notice, this one made such a huge change just from being used that you don't want to make a lot of changes and use something like this and it starts to change your master. You're like, oh no, and then you back it down too much. Typically, I like to set these 3 plugins at a place that I want it to be, and then once it's there, then I'll master through these plugins and then make a little more adjustments at the end. now I'm actually hearing what's going to already happen. So this is called top-down mastering, right? Or mixing, it would be top-down mixing. So it helps you kind of have a better idea of what it's going to sound like at the end, so you don't overdo things. So 3.3, it starts off at 3, I believe, if I check, right? Yeah, and default comes in at 3, only raised to 3.3. That made sense. And so for the last one is my final limiter. Now the vintage limiter is really good because it's very transparent, but again, it kind of gives a little bit of saturation. Typically in mastering, you're trying to make changes, but adding saturation here and there, again, you're trying to work with that headroom, make a loud song, but also increase the pleasantry about how good the song sounds. So you always have true peak on, ceiling is 1, always your final limiter is always at 1, and then I only pull the threshold down by 0.8 because this is all the like last bit of loudness I could even pull from this final limiter, which is good because your final limiter should not be doing heavy lifting. Your final limiter should just be getting you a little more. Now sometimes this may be on 2 or 3 dB, but sometimes only on 0.8. So this is usually the thing doing the least work in terms of your loudness. And if you do that, you won't kill your low end, you won't kill your kick, you won't have these overly protruding vocals, your mid won't overly protrude, your mid and side will all sound wide and working cohesively. Now on the character, I always put it to 3. Sometimes I'll put it to like 2 or 2.5. Sometimes I even get it lower, but I usually just put it to 3 at a starting place, so I have a little more transience, a little more natural dynamics. It's not squashing too much, and then I'll play with it from there. Now in this instance, I actually left it at 3 because I thought that I liked how it sounded. Again, all these decisions are just based on how you feel. So all this here, leave it on 2. That sounds the best in my opinion. Before and after, our final piece.
Looking back, tell me where you at. Looking back, looking in my past. Looking back, tell me where you at. If I wreck, sorry girl, my bad.
So if you notice in this instance, what this limiter ended up doing was not even necessarily making it louder, it just brought down a little bit of that vocal, a little bit of the very tip top of that vocal, and made it more in line with everything else. Now sometimes you've already maxed out your loudness, like this is about as loud as your song is going to get, but this last limiter, which use just a little bit, will glue it all together just a little bit more, very transparently, and really max out that last bit that you can do in your master. And so that would be the whole chain, man. That's everything right there. One more time, like the finished version of this song right here in Pro Tools.
Looking back, tell me where you at. Looking back, looking in my past. Looking back, tell me where you at. If I wreck, sorry girl, my bad. If I wreck, told you girl, my bad. Don't be mad, I do what I can.
So man, there it is, right? That's the song mastered, going from a pure mix to a master. Man, I hope you liked it, man. Go ahead and comment, what you thought, if you got any good tips from this, and man, I'll just check you in the next one.